Post-exercise cognitive testing. So this is our Blackhawks test. This is why we do this, right? So what they did here is they looked at patients that had a history of concussion. So these patients were no longer symptomatic, okay? But they had had a history of concussion, all right, against 34 controls that had no history of concussion. They put them on a stationary bike and had them exercise at 80% of their max heart rate. Before and after exercise, participants performed a computer switch task designed specifically to recruit executive functions. So I'll show you what the switch task is, but basically it's a neurocognitive test. They run it before, then they go and do a bunch of exercise, then they run it after, and they try to see, is there differences, right? Are we able to pick up subtle differences? And they compared people with a history of concussion who were no longer symptomatic and a control group with no history of concussion. And what they found was no interaction or main effects were found for ANCOVA's significantly more history of concussion athletes, 21% underperformed following exercise than at rest. Only 3% underperformed at rest. And when you compare that to the control group, which didn't have that same finding, the results indicate that an acute bout of exercise can reveal persistent alterations that are not present at rest in the protracted phase of concussion. All athletes were asymptomatic, did the switch task, like I said. Cognitive testing was done after a 5-minute cool down. Here is the actual switch test. So basically they do two things. So they say they do a first rule set. So participants were instructed to press the left button on the response pad if the stimulus presented on the screen was blue, and the right button if it was green. Participants then followed the same procedure for a second condition. However, this time they were instructed to press the left button if the stimulus was a circle, and the right button if it was a square. Then participants completed a heterogeneous or mixed rule set condition. This would just blow my mind, by the way, during which they were required to alternate responses between the color rule set and the shape rule set according to the outline of the stimuli. If the outline was solid, they had to respond according to the color rule set. If the outline was dashed, they had to respond according to the shape rule set. I mean, this hurts my brain just trying to think about this, but you can see I don't know if you can see closely, but you can see this one is dashed. This line is dashed. So that means because it's a dashed line, outline was dashed, they had to respond according to the shape. So that means it's dashed. So it's a square, which means that it's a square. So I'd have to hit the right button. So you can see how hard this would be, right? But they train them. So they do a training set where they do, first they're doing the color, then they're doing the shape, then they're doing the mixed. 7 athletes from the concussion group were categorized in the fail category post-exercise, while a single athlete failed at rest. Of those who failed post-exercise, 4 had a history of 1, 1 had a history of 2, 1 had a history of 3, and 1 had a history of 4 concussions. Thus, post-exercise assessment can reveal persistent alterations that we do not detect at rest in 1 in 5 athletes in the concussion group. So basically, we should be physically exerting athletes and then testing them prior to return to sport.